Today I'll be talking about a new ski boot for the winter 2022-2023 season. These here, the K2 Mindbender 130 LV, which as you can see are quite colorful and a little bit on the sturdy and hefty side. These are a pretty good boot for situations when performance is a little bit more important than weight. These Mindbender 130 LV boots retailed for 799 Canadian dollars. And I paid for these boots with my own money, and I am not affiliated with K2. As with any ski boot, there are going to be compromises. And while these are Alpine touring boots, you can see they're compatible with Alpine bindings, toe, and the heel, as well as with Tech bindings, based on the pins, and posts on the back. One of the most important factors influencing any ski boot's performance is the number of buckles and how they are situated. Here on the K2 Mindbender 130s, we have two buckles at the base of the boot, and then two higher up at the cuff. I find these buckles to give a good amount of support and have a pretty wide range of sizing opportunities. You can actually move the mounting plate on the lower buckles as well as the upper ones. If you have to tighten them more, say you've had the boots for a while, the liners start to pack out, you are able to get a fair bit more range of tightening after the fact, without buying new liners. One of the most important things to consider about an Alpine touring boot is how does it walk? In this case, there are notches on the upper two buckles. You can see here, kind of wiggle back and forth. Clip into this while you are in walk mode. It'll give you a little bit of pivot back and forth. Our ski to walk mode on the back is a pretty classic design, large spring-loaded beam. This in the ski position, quite stiff, you're not going to move around. Flip it into walk, and K2 quotes you have about 50 degrees range of motion. These boots are still quite new, so they're a little on the stiffer side, but I'm sure they will loosen up eventually. As I mentioned, this is spring-loaded, so if you were to push this back down, it'll go into place. If the boot is not precisely aligned when you push it down, all you have to do, wiggle it a bit, you'll hear it click in, and you'll be good to go. As with any external ski walk mode mechanism, there is a chance of building up ice, either in this part or in the spring itself, and we'll get into later how much of a real effect that actually causes. One nice feature about the Mindbender 130s is both the shell as well as the included liner are heat moldable. The TPU material that makes up the shell, if you can heat it up in the same sort of oven that you would put a liner into, you can get a decent amount of actual just customizability to it. And if you were punching out your boot after the fact, these boots hold punches quite well. I know this as these are actually not the first Mindbenders I have owned. I previously had a set of the original Mindbender 130s, which, as you can see, these took quite a beating. They're well worn, put a lot of miles on them, enough to actually almost wear away the toe pieces and the pins. So I put about 4 seasons of working as an avalanche technician and doing some other tail guiding and other sorts of personal trips on the old Mindbenders. They serve me pretty well, and I'm quite happy about these new ones here. Another important factor about any sort of Alpine touring boot is how do they walk when you're not in skis. In this case, the Mindbender 130s have grip walk soles, which do have indentations and texture on the bottom, which are supposed to improve traction. I found with my old Mindbenders, these little divots just picked up more snow, but I'll see over the next few weeks how these actually behave and how much of an issue that is. One thing to also note with these buckles, you can dial in the amount of tension on them with quite a high precision by actually spinning these around, and you can have a slight extension in the kind of the hanger part of the buckle here to make it a little bit tighter or a little bit looser, depending how your feet feel and what you actually need to perform well. That's a good degree of flexibility in the buckles here. Taking the boot apart, you'll note that the TPU material that makes up the boot is actually quite stiff and can be a bit of a process to actually take the boot apart. If it is cold, There we go. Here we have the liner that comes with the Mindbender 130s. It is a PowerFit Pro Tour, which has optional laces that are included in the boot. I don't have the laces on right now, might put them on later. And as I mentioned, these are heat moldable as well. Personally, I found really good results just molding these once, and they fit my feet pretty well. That may be the liner, and it may be my feet have grown accustomed to the older Mindbenders and just fit these well by default. But yeah, that's probably enough time spent talking about these boots inside. Let's take them out into the snow and see how they do. In terms of touring in these boots, I found that while the pin attachments do work quite well, it's a little more finicky to clip into them in a lot of touring bindings compared to something like a Scarpa boot or a La Sportiva boot. Kind of just the angle of where the pins actually sit. It's a little bit, takes more finesse. You might find it's a bit frustrating, especially if everyone else is in more ski mountaineering or fast and light type boots. Kind of just clip and go. If you don't practice, you might find yourself taking a few tries to be able to clip in properly. So I've been using these boots, the K2 Mindbender 130s, for a little over 3 months now, both working on them as an avalanche technician and doing several recreational trips, including coming into a hut right behind me here. Overall, I gotta say, these are decent touring boots, but they're not perfect. Getting into positive points, these are a 4-buckled boot, so you get quite high ski performance when going downhill. That flex rating of 130 really shines in kind of tricky conditions. You're doing side hilling, edging. Basically, your foot's going to be nice and stabilized and allow you to have a lot of control. Additional positives, the heat moldable liner that comes with the boot I found to be quite comfortable and decently warm, but not overheating warm, which is kind of a good balance. Even on this trip where I'm recording this video right now, my girlfriend and I came up in -30 weather. My toes are a little cold, but not frostbite cold and not sweating. So that's kind of a good metric in my book. Other positives, these boots are great in alpine bindings. Say if you wanted one boot you can take out in the backcountry sometimes while also using your regular kind of on-resort setup. These work quite well. One of the main downsides I've found about these boots is actually getting into them when they're cold. It'd be particularly a problem if you were planning on camping in these boots. I've done a camping trip in them before, and not gonna lie, it took about 20 minutes to get into them, just as when the material on the shell on the outside gets cold, it's really stiff. Basically, it's like a 2-man operation trying to pry them apart to get your foot in. I ended up having to get a hot water bottle, kind of cram it in the top of the boot, and just let a little bit of heat kind of coax its way into the material to soften it up a bit. But far from ideal. That's might be a niche problem, and definitely something you're not going to have if you're using this on like a ski resort for a bit of slack country, or say you're in a mechanized skiing operation where you're mostly skiing downhill, but you still want the flexibility to be able to tour. That is a good use case for these. Another large downside when viewed as a touring boot is just the overall feel when walking in these. The walk mechanism is quite straightforward. This hook on the back. And it does give you a good range of motion when the boot is actually a little bit warmer. Right now it's pretty stiff because it's cold. That being said, moving up and down, you can still feel a lot of resistance in the boot. And if you're doing a very long distance approach, that's going to add up. Just a little more friction, probably a little more wear and tear. If you're prone to blisters, you might get increased chance of that. So I'd kind of say that while these are really good for skiing downhill and they can tour, they probably shouldn't be your go-to touring boot. They kind of shine in situations like multi-day hut trips or say slack country off the boundary of a resort where you might be touring a bit, but generally you're going to be going down more so. And that's kind of the best use case I found for these. One other downside I've found is that the grip walk soles, if there's any sort of temperature change, like you're going inside and outside of a building, are horrible for building up ice. Sometimes gets to a level where it's pretty difficult to get into your bindings, but that is kind of a common concern with a lot of different ski boots, but these I found are particularly prone to icing. Who are these boots best for? I'd kind of say people in the ski industry, if you want a work boot where, say you work at a ski resort or even a mechanized skiing operation where most of the time you're skiing downhill, these are great. Good flex rating, overall good heat, good ski performance. They work well going down, and they also have the flexibility. They can tour if you need to. That being said, they're definitely not a full-time touring boot, and they could get a little bit tedious if you were spending day in, day out, or multi-day travel on these. Who is this boot probably not for? I'd say anyone going fast and light or kind of more longer traverse type missions where there's a lot more uphill or flat travel compared to downhill. Or if you're in a situation where you do have a lot of up and down, but the down is not that technical, you can probably get away with something lighter that will give you more comfort for those walking sections and overall might make for a bit of a happier trip. But yeah, that's it for now. Happy trails.